of the Russian armies that threatened Hungary. It wouldn't win the war, but it would be a smashing blow that would paralyze the Russian army. April brought Europe her first wartime spring. The grim Russian winter melted into a landscape of astonishing beauty. The troops of Falkenhayn's striking force settled down for the long train journey to the wide horizons of the east. This was an army made for victory. Only the Marne and first Ypres marred a record of success, stretching back through Sedan in 1870 to Waterloo. At fixed intervals, the packed trains rolled eastwards. Speed 19 miles an hour. 180 trains to each army corps. With the army went the now familiar German battering ram, medium and heavy howitzers, huge stocks of shells to sweep away the Russian defenses like a cyclone. The breakthrough was to be made by the 11th Army under von Mackensen. His orders were clear.
The 11th Army must make quick forward progress. This is of fundamental importance. Only in speed lies the guarantee that we shall be able to stop the enemy bringing up his reserves.
By the 28th of April, 170,000 men and 1,000 guns had been slotted into an 18-mile front. No shortage of ammunition here. Falkenhayn wrote,
"By the spring of 1915, GHQ was relieved of any serious anxiety with regard to munitions supply."
May the 2nd. From 6 till 10 in the morning, 1,000 guns, half of them heavy, smashed the Russian defenses to shreds. Then the attack went in.
Neither fire, nor trenches, nor barbed wire could stop the assault, although our ranks became thinner and thinner. After 35 minutes, and despite the tropical heat, we reached the enemy. The Russians clung ferociously to their trenches, but in another 10 minutes the job was finished.
Von Mackensen signaled to the Kaiser,
"I report to your Majesty that the order to make the enemy's positions in the Carpathians untenable has been carried out. The enemy is in retreat along the whole line."
Against the weight and power of the German pursuit, the Russians could do nothing. A Russian commander wrote,
"The retreat from Galicia was one vast tragedy for the Russian army. No cartridges, no shells, bloody fighting and difficult marches, day after day. No end of weariness, physical and moral, faint hopes followed by sinister dread. For 11 days, the German heavy artillery swept away whole lines of our trenches and their defenders with them. We hardly replied. There was nothing to reply with."
A Russian general had sent an urgent message to Petrograd.
"There are no rifles. 150,000 men are without rifles. From hour to hour it is worse. We await the heavenly manna from you."
At the end of May, Mackensen's troops marched in triumph into the fortress city of Przemysl. It had been in Russian hands for only 2 months. The victorious Germans and Austrians had marched more than 100 miles through the heat and dust of the Galician summer. They'd forced the Russians to retreat along the whole Carpathian front. As they entered Przemysl, their triumphant progress was being celebrated 450 miles behind them in Berlin, with flags and bell ringing and the cheers of a proud and grateful nation. The fall of Przemysl marked yet another stage in the dumb but terrible agony of the Russian peasant armies.
The Russian soldier was a very good soldier, provided he was properly led. But without officers, say officers were wounded or killed, the simple Russian mushik had not much initiative. After all, they were mostly peasants, very simple, good-natured men, very big and tough, but without guidance, they were lost. And very often, they, to our great surprise, they surrendered in droves.
By the time they were captured, some Russian soldiers had been retreating for a month. Over 100,000 of their comrades had been killed.
The Russian army was at the end of its power. The uninterrupted fighting in the Carpathians had costed heavy losses. The deficit in officers and men was terrifying. The lack of arms and ammunition was catastrophic.
For the Russian prisoners, the unequal struggle against Germany's might was over, and they celebrated the miracle of still being alive. On the Western Front, spring brought new hope. It was the time for battle again, and the Germans knew it. Their 400 miles of trenches, behind barbed wire, sometimes as thick as a thumb, walled the French off from their lost lands. As the weather improved, the French would be coming to take them back. The Germans watched and waited for the attacks they knew must come. Opposite them, sometimes half a mile away, sometimes only 20 yards, the Allies also waited. The temporary lines where the balance of war had settled at the end of 1914 were acquiring a squalid permanence. Haphazard sections of trench were deepened and joined to each other. Drains were scooped in the mud. Holes in the ground had been converted into dugouts. They were at least splinter-proof, which meant much to an army fighting an artillery war. The soldiers knew something must happen soon. A French dragoon wrote,
In spring, the benumbed army stirred itself, stretched its legs, and awoke to the fact that a new era was about to begin. The change took place with the greatest mystery. Rumors, coming no one knew where from, began to circulate.
The basic question of 1915 was, could the Allies break through the German defensive works? Lord Kitchener expressed the widespread doubts.
I suppose we must recognize that the French army cannot make a sufficient break through the German lines of defense to cause a complete change of the situation. The German lines in France may be looked upon as a fortress that cannot be carried by assault.
But the Germans left General Joffre, the French commander-in-chief, with no choice.
The best and largest portion of the German army was on our soil, with its